Welcome back to Daily English Voices. Close your eyes for a second and picture a cold morning beside the ocean. The sand is wet. The wind is strong. Two brothers in worn coats kneel beside a fragile machine made of wood, cloth, wire, hope, and stubborn faith. No orchestra plays. No cameras flash. No leader gives a speech. There are only gulls, waves, a few curious neighbors, and the sound of a small engine coughing itself awake. The brothers glance at each other. One climbs onto the lower wing and lies flat on his stomach to cut the wind. The other steadies the craft, breathes, and lets go. The machine slides, rattles, hesitates, then rises. It does not rise high. It does not rise long. But it rises, and in that brief slice of sky the world changes forever. That is where our story is headed. But to understand how an impossible moment becomes real, we need to walk back to where it began, not in fame or wealth, but in curiosity, patience, and a house filled with small books, simple tools, and big questions. Wilbur and Orville Wright did not grow up in palaces of science. They grew up in the ordinary rooms of an American home where books sat by the bed, where conversations mattered, and where hands fixed what was broken. Their father, a traveling bishop, believed in words and ideas. Their mother, quiet and brilliant with tools, believed that anything could be taken apart, studied, and made better. The boys learned both lessons. They learned to think and to build. They learned to try, fail, and try again. One day their father came home with a tiny toy made of cork, bamboo, and rubber bands. A hand-sized helicopter. Twist, release, and it flew, a small miracle that lasted only seconds before it fluttered down. The toy broke. The idea did not. The brothers made new versions. They watched the way the toy caught air and the way the spinning parts acted like wings. They didn't have the words aerodynamics or lift on their tongues yet, but they felt those truths in their hands, the way a carpenter understands wood without a textbook. They were not rich, so they worked. A printing business taught them to make machines do careful, repeatable work. A bicycle shop taught them balance, precision, and the importance of light, strong parts tuned for motion. Bicycles are honest teachers. If a wheel is the wrong shape, you know it on the first ride. If a frame is weak, you learn it the hard way. In that shop, the brothers found a laboratory hiding in plain sight: lathes, metal, wood, chain, and time. They read about gliders. They read about bird flight. They argued. They measured. They went outside and watched wings that grew on trees' branches in spring and finally unfolded on summer. Air real wings, feathers that flexed and twisted as birds turned, climbed, and met the wind. Flight is not just about flapping, they realized. It is about control. Many people in the late 1800s said flight was impossible. Some said it was theoretically possible but not practical. Others said it was a fairy tale for poets. The brothers listened and kept working. They were not proud men in a hurry to impress. They were patient men in a hurry to learn. When they looked at the history of flying machines, they saw two patterns: spectacular claims and painful crashes. Almost everyone focused on power, more engine, bigger propeller, stronger push, as if a brute force approach alone could lift a human into the air and keep him there. The brothers chose a different problem as their starting point: balance. If you cannot control an aircraft, power only helps you crash faster. So they built gliders. To learn where air was generous and honest, they went to Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, where the wind blows steady and the sand forgives. There were no hotels waiting, only dunes, storms, and a sky that does not care who you are. They lived in tents, cooked their own food, stitched canvas, and carried their craft up hills until their legs ached. They made hundreds of short flights, crashed, repaired, changed angles, moved the center of gravity, twisted the wings, and tried again. They turned mistakes into maps. They turned pain into notes. When a design failed, they did not throw it away with anger. They asked it questions. Why did you fail? What did you teach us? They built a small wind tunnel to test wing shapes. They discovered that many known numbers in books were wrong. They ran careful experiments and replaced guesses with measurements they trusted because they had made them with their own hands. After years of lifting, dragging, crashing, and floating, they could guide a glider like a living thing. Now came the leap, power. Engines then were heavy. They were proud of their weight, boasting about strength, as if the ground had made them into kings. Air does not care about such kings. Air cares about shape and speed. The brothers looked for a light engine and found none. So in the corner of a small shop, with the help of a quiet genius named Charlie Taylor, they built one. It was not beautiful, but it was honest aluminum, gasoline, and just enough strength to do the job. 12 horsepower. Enough to turn twin propellers that were not paddles pushing against air, but spinning wings slicing and shaping it. That propeller idea was the true hinge. A propeller is a wing moving in a circle. If its shape is right, it does not fight the air, it persuades the air. It draws the machine forward, and the forward motion lets the wings do their greater magic, turning movement into lift. The brothers tried many shapes. They did math on the backs of envelopes and scratched formulas into wood. They tested, trimmed, and tested again. By the time they finished, their wooden propellers were astonishingly efficient, so efficient that even today, engineers look at them with respect. The machine they built in 1903 did not look ready to change the world. It looked like a bed frame with ideas. A 40-foot wingspan. Wires crisscrossed like harp strings. Cloth stretched tight like a drum. A small engine. 2 propellers behind the wings. No cockpit, no windshield, no seat, just a thin place to lie face down so that the pilot's body made less drag. Controls that warped the wings and turned a small rudder. A launch rail instead of wheels. Everything was strange and simple, which is another way of saying it was precise. On December 17, 1903, with frost hard on the sand and breath smoking in the air, they tried again. The first attempt a few days earlier had stalled and broken parts, but setbacks were now ordinary friends. Orville climbed onto the flyer, Wilbur steadied the wingtip. The engine coughed, caught, and hummed. The flyer rattled down the rail and lifted. 12 seconds, 120 feet. Not much to see unless you lived all your life under a sky that never allowed a human to rise on his own power. They flew again. They went farther. The final flight that day lasted 59 seconds and crossed 852 feet. There was no band to play, but the wind made its own music against the cloth. That sound was enough. You might imagine that such a day would open every door. It did not. Big newspapers yawned. Important men doubted. Scholars demanded proof, then ignored it when it did not arrive wrapped in the styling they expected. If this were true, some said, the government would tell us. Others laughed at the idea that 2 bicycle mechanics could accomplish what official science had not. The brothers did not respond with anger. They responded with more flights, more careful designs, more patience. They improved everything, stronger frames, better controls, and longer flights, always with the same humble workshop as their base. By 1905 they had a machine that could fly for long minutes, turn gracefully, and land where a pilot wished. Still, much of the world refused to see. There was another reason for secrecy. The brothers knew that good ideas travel fast, and not always in honest shoes. They wanted a contract clear recognition of their invention before they revealed all their methods in public. They spoke with the U.S. Army and with European officials. There were delays, doubts, and misunderstandings. Meanwhile, other pioneers made their own attempts, some brave, some reckless, some loud. In Paris, a talented Brazilian named Alberto Santos Dumont captured attention with dramatic public flights novel, exciting, and carefully staged. The press loved him. Many people forgot or never knew that the quiet brothers from Ohio had already solved the hardest parts. The Wrights said little and kept working. At last, real demonstrations were arranged. In 1908, Wilbur traveled to France to fly for the skeptical heart of European aviation. He arrived to jokes about his plain clothes and his American barnyard machine. He did not argue. He unpacked crates that had been damaged in shipping and rebuilt the flyer with his own hands. When he finally lifted off, he did not hop like a stone, he moved like a bird. He turned with control. He circled the field as if drawing a signature in the air. He landed as gently as a hand on water. Silence, then applause, then astonishment that rolled across Europe like weather. Doubt turned to curiosity, then respect, then awe. Kings and engineers came to watch. Sober men smiled like children when Wilbur banked into a tight curve and floated past as if he had found a soft stairway in the sky. Back in the United States, Orville prepared for Army trials at Fort Myer, Virginia. The requirements were clear and demanding: fly an hour with a passenger, prove control, prove safety. Orville modified the machine, practiced, and delivered. He stayed aloft past the hour mark, carried officers, and landed precisely. Crowds cheered. Headlines grew bold. And then, in a single flight, disaster arrived. A propeller cracked in the air. The machine shuddered and fell. Orville survived with serious injuries. His passenger, Lieutenant Thomas Selfridge, died the first fatality in a powered airplane. The brothers, who had carried risk like a quiet weight for years, felt the hammer of that loss. The press asked hard questions. Was flight worth it? Could it ever be safe? Orville healed slowly. Wilbur continued demonstrations in Europe with careful, quiet excellence, carrying passengers and easing fear with proof rather than speeches. By 1909, everything changed. Contracts were signed. The U.S. Army bought a machine. European governments made offers. A small shop became a company. Training fields became schools. The brothers hired pilots, taught them, and learned from them. They were now inventors and entrepreneurs, teachers and standard-bearers. With recognition came new burdens: management, travel, public events, and something darker: the long fight over patents. The brothers held a patent for their control system, the subtle twisting of wings that allowed true steering. Competitors used similar ideas and called them different. Lawsuits began. Wilbur, who had once spent his days testing the sky, now spent them in courtrooms and offices. He believed he was defending not only his rights but the very truth of how flight works. The fight was bitter and slow. It preserved credit but drained joy. Then illness came. In 1912, after one more exhausting trip, Wilbur fell sick. Typhoid fever, small bacteria doing what storms and crashes had failed to do. He had always been steady, serious, and strong. Now his body weakened. His sister Catherine and his brother Orville watched, hoping for a turn that did not come. He died at 45. The world mourned a builder who had never asked for applause. Orville went on without his brother, but the sharp point of his life had been dulled. He kept working for safer flight, advised the government, and protected the legacy they had made together. He would live to see machines far beyond their first flyer, metal bodies, closed cabins, engines that roared like storms, and wings that did not need wires. He saw World War I turn airplanes into weapons, a use that saddened him. He saw peacetime transform airplanes into bridges between continents. The Wright name spread in the slow, respectful way that real recognition does. Museums asked for the 1903 flyer. For a time, hurt by disputes over credit, Orville kept it away from Washington. In the end it found its place at the Smithsonian Institution, where children walk past it with wide eyes and quiet steps, as if they have entered a chapel made of air. Airports and bases took the brothers' name. A national day, August 19, Orville's birthday, was set aside to honor aviation. Engineers and pilots who never met the brothers still feel their presence every time they bank, align a landing, or test a new wing. It is easy to turn a story like this into a poster with a slogan. It is harder and more useful to take its lessons into your own life, where the tools are messy and the hours are long. The first lesson is simple: begin with what you have. The brothers did not wait for a university to invite them or for a sponsor to bless them. They began with a toy and a question. If you want to build anything, language, a business, a habit, a friendship, start small and start now. The second lesson is kinder than it sounds: let failure teach you. When the wind knocks you down, do not curse the wind, ask it what it wants. Fix one angle, move one part, try one more time. The third lesson is about voice. The brothers did not shout at their critics. They let results speak. In a noisy world, quiet work is often the strongest argument. The fourth lesson is faith not in magic, but in steady effort. Believe that repetition shapes reality. Believe that careful practice turns fear into familiarity. The fifth is balance. Defend what you build, but do not let the fight swallow your life. Protect your idea without losing your peace. Now, because this is Daily English Voices, we should also look at a softer, parallel story that was happening inside you as you listened. While you traveled through dunes and workshops, while you heard about propellers and patents, your mind was practicing new rhythms of English. You followed short sentences and longer ones. You learned to hold a timeline in your head and to tie events with words like meanwhile, however, and at last. You shadowed phrases, they did not argue. They kept working, and you felt how repetition can be music in speech. You handled dates and places without fear. You recognized how simple verbs and clear nouns carry a story farther than fancy words do. You balanced past tense for facts with present tense for feelings. This is not a side effect. This is the method. Learn meaning and language at the same time, and both grow stronger. Think about the first flight again. 12 seconds is not a glorious number. It does not sing. It is barely the length of one deep breath. But a deep breath is where everything begins: before a speech, before a run, before an apology, before a promise. 12 seconds was enough to prove a principle. Once a principle is proven, time becomes elastic. In 5 years, a minute becomes possible. In a decade, an hour. In a lifetime, the world rearranges itself around a new idea. If your first English conversation lasts 30 seconds and ends with a shy laugh, do not be ashamed. You are laying a rail in the sand. You are finding the angle of your own wings. There is pain in the right story. There is also peace. Pain came with crashes, with doubt, with a grave none of us can pass by without feeling a hard stone of sorrow, Lieutenant Selfridge's death. Peace came with honest work, shared purpose, and the knowledge that a human being can be brave without being loud. And there is a deeper line running through the whole story, a quiet message from two men who never married, never sought a stage, and never stopped arguing with each other like brothers in a shop where the light falls warm across wood shavings. The future is built by hands that listen. Listen to the wind. Listen to the materials. Listen to your failures. Listen to each other. When you board an airplane today, you do not think about the invisible geometry that holds you up. You think about your destination. A child in the next row might look out the window and see a white wing curving against blue. The child will not say, airfoil, or angle of attack. The child will say, clouds. That is as it should be. But somewhere in the design of that quiet, powerful wing are the fingerprints of two brothers who argued gently over the shape of a curve and the placement of a brace, who chose lightness over pride, and who trusted the sky enough to meet it without armor. And what about you? What is the sky you avoid because someone told you it was impossible, or because you told yourself you should wait until you are ready? Perhaps your sky is language. Perhaps it is a business plan in a notebook, a song on your phone, a course you dream of taking, a letter you need to write. Your first attempt may look strange. People may shrug or joke. Let them. Build in the corner where you have tools, time, and a little courage. Carry your machine up the same hill again and again. Let the wind point out your mistakes. Make the next version. Repeat. One day, you will feel it, the difference between dragging along the ground and rising. It may last 12 seconds. It may last less. But it will be long enough to tell you the truth you need, not that it is easy, not that you are done, but that it is possible. Once you know that, the rest is practice, patience, and the steady art of listening to the air. If the brothers could speak to you now, I imagine they would avoid speeches. Wilbur might look at your project quietly, ask one precise question, and suggest a small change that makes a big difference. Orville might show you two ways to solve the same problem and let you pick the one that feels honest in your hands. Neither would promise shortcuts. Both would promise that real work creates its own kind of joy, deep and warm, like the light in a shop at dusk. They would remind you that applause is nice, but that the sound of a well-tuned engine, or a sentence that finally says what you mean, or a plan that at last takes shape, those are richer rewards. So, as this story lands, do not leave it at the gate. Take it with you into tomorrow's routine. When you listen to English, listen the way the brothers watched birds, not for decoration, but for structure. When you speak, let your sentences twist and flex like wings, not stiff but controlled. When you read, build a small wind tunnel in your mind where you can test phrases, feel which shapes move smoothly through meaning, and which ones tear at the air. When you fail, treat the ground kindly. It has taught you something. Thank you for staying to the end. Thank you for honoring two lives that turned a toy into a world. If this story put even a small lift under your day, pass it on. Share it with someone who needs a reason to begin. Subscribe if you want more stories that teach your heart and your English at the same time. And tonight, before you sleep, ask yourself the oldest, smallest, bravest question: what can I build with what I have? Then tomorrow, build one honest piece of it. The sky is still there. The wind is still teaching. Your 12 seconds are waiting.